Fab. So afternoon, and thank you everyone for coming and Justine for joining. So I'm Bethan. I am the Female Empowerment and Diversity Project Manager for the Peak Human Rights Group. So SHRG, as shortened, is an NGO with special consultative status at the United Nations since 2015, and we've been around since 1984. In March 2021, Peak Human Rights Group started our Female Empowerment Series, which exists to discuss the importance of female representation in intersectional feminism and predominantly at the moment, the need for better education on female reproductive health, and then separately menstrual health as well. So we are excited to announce that this is our third monthly webinar on different stages of female reproductive health. And this month is with Justine focusing on conceiving and just kind of some of the complications or some of the stages through that. So I'll now introduce Justine Bold, and then from there we'll kind of go into the discussion. So she's had decades of work that she's done in this field. She works as an experienced senior lecturer at Cardiff University and the University of Worcester. She is interdisciplinary interest and has published many health-related books, journals, articles, and conference papers, and written a variety of continuing professional development seminars on nutritional topics. She has researched interest in the role of narratives and accounts of lived experiences in medical and healthcare professional education, and is pursuing a PhD by publication. She has contributed to the TV and radio programs, including BBC Radio 2, Trust Me, I'm a Doctor, BBC News and Radio 4's Today programme, and Women's Hour. Some of the books that she has worked on and is editing books on infertility and IVF, which contain an overview on how nutrition can impact on fertility and many patients' narratives and experiences, and has also co-authored a book on mental health. So her predominant research before this as well is in nutrition, as you mentioned, and infertility, and the pre-conceptual cure and care, and looking at food allergies and intolerances, particularly focusing on gluten and coeliac disease, as well as mental health. So I'll pass over to Justine to kind of elaborate further on the work she's doing and kind of what has really sparked, I guess, your interest in this realm.
Right, so thank you very much, Beth. Oh, I call you Beth. I feel a bit like a dinosaur saying decades of work. Hopefully I'm not that old yet. I qualified in nutrition, and it was my second career. So I'd already had a career in business, and I kind of found nutrition through dealing with my own health issues. And I think that's kind of like informed my development as, as a health professional, but also as an educator. And particularly, I was interested in, so I've got some kittens and one has decided to come for a walk. So here he is. He's a feral cat, and he has had cat flu, but he is now better. And we have got his sister somewhere, but she's nice and quiet. So personal experience has informed my approach, but it's also sort of about the people that I've worked with, and I have worked with a lot of women who I think, turn to maybe complementary medicine or nutritional approaches, or thinking about self-care, what they can do themselves with their own maybe diet, lifestyles, exercise, sleep patterns, because they're not maybe very satisfied with conventional management, or maybe aren't feeling heard. So I've become kind of interested in, obviously the lifestyle aspects and the nutrition aspects of self-care, but also the process of hearing, those stories from women, and listening to them and honouring them, and, trying to use those to better our care for women in general. And I think, there's a lot of taboo still about talking around menstruation and pain around menstruation particularly. There's a lot of, I suppose, normalization of pain around menstruation as well. And some of that, to some degree, stops women from seeking, medical help in the way that they probably should. So one of the aims of today is to encourage people to seek medical help, appropriate medical help. because things can get diagnosed a bit late, and that can cause problems with conceiving. So we'll go through some of that. So, you know, I'm interested, you know, I have worked, it's ironic actually, I worked with a lot of women as a nutritional therapist, you know, on periods and polycystic ovaries, and, you know, sometimes on infertility, sometimes ladies who were having miscarriages or early pregnancy losses. And I, at that time, hadn't really thought about conceiving myself. And then when I did start to conceive, I had problems conceiving. So a lot of my own experience then sort of further refined my interest in this area. And I've obviously used that to edit some textbooks for, you know, health profession and medical education. So I hope that gives you an overview. I'm going to try and, I still can't share my screen. So you might be able to share it maybe, but it doesn't matter. We can just talk. I don't really mind.
Yeah, we'll kind of have a back and forth, and then if there's a point that you think this visual will work, I'll make you host. But no, that was great. I think that it's really important as well. Obviously, a lot of the work we've done at the moment is looking at kind of the education system on a wider scale, but obviously predominantly all of the education we learn, history, etc., is very much kind of white middle class male. And obviously then when it comes to the work you're doing at the moment and actually what's being covered, so much is being missed because you're not having people who have either personally gone through it or who menstruate, who actually understand this is what my body's doing, this is what I need. Yeah. So I think that it's invaluable, you know, and horrific that you've had these experiences, but obviously the amount you then can give back to someone and say, actually, you know, this is why nutrition or whatever you're focusing on at different points is so important.
It's also trying to change, you know, the system of care in a way around it. You know, first of all, people say, you know, there's little evidence around nutrition and lifestyle approaches. So that's one kind of aim of work in a way, is to try and work on projects that help create some evidence, even if they're small pieces of research. And, you know, I think there is a bit of, you know, it's quite difficult to get funding for big projects in women's health and in studies that look at kind of nutrition and lifestyle in this area. So that, you know, that's one issue. And I think the other thing is that it's just sort of, if you think about education, I've got 2 boys who are 9 shortly. I have seen their kind of sex and relationships kind of education curriculum, and it does actually explore a lot more about relationships and, you know, I guess self-esteem around physical confidence, which I would say is positive. So that's very different from the education that I got. But the education is still there, sort of assuming that anybody and everyone can get pregnant easily. And they don't really give people a sense that actually it's not a given that you can have a child. It's not easy for everybody. And actually, at the moment, you know, 1 in 7 couples in the UK are having trouble conceiving. So for quite a number of people, it's actually quite difficult. So I think that that's a big gap in our education as well, to make people realise that actually it's not a given, that there are some problems that affect women. You know, endometriosis is one of them, and that affects about 10% of all women, and it can make having a child quite hard. And, you know, male infertility seems to be, you know, there's questions about whether it is, or, you know, whether the data is real in terms of the sperm counts declining, but it looks like we've got decreases in the quality of sperm in kind of a Western developed world, which is affecting male fertility overall. And quite a number of men have subfertility, and that's an issue for them. So yeah, it's going to be really good to kind of explore and tease apart these issues, I think. And you know, I really hope that they, you know, in sex and relationships education at school, they will actually add a bit more of that in. and I don't know whether you can share that poster that was produced by Isha, which it's on fertility education. So I think it's a really useful poster to share with people, because it talks about, you know, looking after yourself to kind of safeguard your future fertility, and sort of eating well and exercising to do that essentially. And you know, if you can, obviously not smoke, or give up smoking if you're smoking, and not drinking to excess as well for that reason.
Yeah, no, that's in our newsletter for this month, and we're trying to put it out on our socials as well. But I think, and we'll go into it in more detail, I guess, throughout the kind of hour. But obviously you mentioned about kind of sperm count, etc. And again, I think that is something that relates to the lack of funding, is that struggling to be able to conceive is seen as a predominantly woman's issue because they're the one who's carrying the child. And actually, you know, it takes so long before the man is actually tested to see, well, what is your sperm count? And maybe that's changing. It's not something I'm as up to date to, but it's something I knew. Yeah.
I think it's around in around 40% of couples struggling to conceive, so infertile couples, there's both a male and a female factor. So it isn't just a female problem. You know, male fertility health is really important too.
So on that, we'll go on to the next part, which kind of brings in, I guess, more of your nutritional kind of side of things. So as we mentioned, that you've got, I don't know if it's a BCNH diploma in nutritional therapy. So within this kind of work you've done on nutrition and you're further to do in your research, what can you elaborate further on the roles of vitamins and minerals that has on someone's fertility to either enhance their chances of conceiving, or at least to be able to track kind of how their body is responding if they have little or a deficiency in certain vitamins and minerals?
Yeah, I think, you know, good nutrition, it starts with having all nutrients kind of in roughly the right amounts, and that includes macronutrients, you know, so things like proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, obviously water as well. So, you know, you need those in the right balance as well. And if somebody isn't having enough protein, then that could interfere with fertility. But in terms of vitamins and minerals, there's some really important ones for female fertility. And they obviously include folic acid. You know, that's one that most people will be aware of. And if they are trying to have a baby, they might be taking a supplement of it, or they would be aware that they need it. And it would be one of the ingredients that they're looking for in a multivitamin if they're buying one from the high street. So folic acid, it's been established for a long time that deficiency is linked to neural tube defects. And an example of that is spina bifida. So it is recommended in the first trimester of pregnancy to avoid neural tube defects, you know, affecting the pregnancy. They are looking at adding folic acid to foods. It's called food fortification. They've done this in America, and they were bringing it in the UK. And obviously, it's an ingredient that you would find in cereals that have been fortified, where they've added nutrients back in. So folic acid is really important. It's actually found in green foods as well. So it's found in foliage, essentially. So, you know, greens and vegetables, things that maybe people don't eat enough of, are a really rich source as well. So that's fundamental. And then two others that I think are really fundamental. The first one is iron. Obviously, women lose a lot of iron through menstruation anyway, but additional is needed to get pregnant and to facilitate, you know, the development of a pregnancy. You need maternal blood volume increases. So the woman's blood supply needs to get bigger, and it needs to also make the embryo's blood supply, or the fetus's blood supply, as it grows. So there's a very heavy demand for iron, and studies show there are studies going back to the mid-90s that were published in the Lancet that show that, you know, long-term kind of fertility issues, if they supplement iron and vitamin C, women can get pregnant with that. And there's some debate also about whether we've got the reference ranges correct for ferritin, which is one of the kind of it's one of the things that's measured in blood tests when you have a blood test at the doctor's to assess kind of iron status. So I think, you know, iron is really key. And I think what we know at the moment is that there's increasing trends to vegetarianism, veganism, very low fat diets maybe as well, with little animal protein. So I think iron deficiency is quite a risk, especially in young girls. Well, I'd say teenage and young 20s. We have something, it's like a nutrition survey that rolls in the UK. It's called the National Nutrition and Diet Survey. And they assess intakes across the population from, it's a representative sample, and they assess intakes, and they sometimes take blood measurements as well. But we know that quite a lot of females in those age groups, so the teens or the 20s, are not hitting the basic requirement for iron. And our requirements, sorry about my dinging, I don't know quite how to turn it off without turning you off as well. So the basic, all our nutritional requirements in the UK, they're actually set to prevent deficiency diseases. They're not set for optimum health. So if you think that people aren't even hitting the basic requirement, then that makes you aware really of the consequences. And as veganism and vegetarianism, and maybe in a way I want to say kind of restricted eating can affect those age groups, or be taken up by those age groups if they've got moral beliefs. If they're not eating suitable alternatives, and you can find iron in vegan foods, but it's things like red lentils and sultanas, and molasses, and you need to have those foods in a vegan or vegetarian diet in quite high amounts, probably with some acidic fruits to increase absorption. So you'd need a very well planned vegan or vegetarian diet to deliver the right amounts of those nutrients. And I think it's the well planned bit that can be missing from a lot of that age group's diet, as it were. So I think that there's a role for supplementation with a multivitamin, containing quite a good level of iron, perhaps, and folic acid for women in that age group. One of the other vitamins that's really key is vitamin D, and the requirements for this vitamin were revised in the UK in 2016, and they've started to recommend a higher level of intake. So they've started to acknowledge its importance because it sort of acts as a pro-hormone. They've set the requirements based upon its role in bone health and skeletal health, really. That gives you one clue as to its importance in, conceiving and pregnancy, because it has a role in calcium metabolism and regulating that. So it's obviously we need extra calcium and vitamin D if we're trying to make another person who has bones and a skeleton that's developing in utero. So that's one obviously area it's important. But I think what we've started to see, and especially with COVID, is that it has many other functions. And there's quite a lot of research on its role in immunity. And I have seen some really good data saying it's really fundamental for women's health, and fundamental for fertility, pregnancy, and lactation. And without it, it's associated, if you are low in vitamin D, you are, it's going to maybe be associated with infertility. So, that's also fundamental. And it's another nutrient that we don't really find in vegan foods or vegetarian foods. You can find a form of it in some mushrooms or yeasts, but that's it really. Otherwise, it's in eggs, which would be okay on a vegetarian diet if somebody eats eggs. And it's in things like oily fish. It's not in that many foods because our main source of vitamin D is generally through sunlight exposure on our skin. So when we're going outside and we're not covered up and we don't have sunscreen on, and it's between April and October, we might make some vitamin D on the exposed areas of our skin. Obviously, we don't want to get sunburnt in the process. So you need to have, maybe just 20 minutes of safe sun exposure. But in wintertime, we won't have that. And obviously, if we've been in lockdown and we've had only 1 hour out every day, which we did in 2020 in the first, few months of the pandemic, then we won't be making as much vitamin D. So, that's important. That's really important. The National Nutrition and Diet Survey data on vitamin D is that a third of UK adults are deficient. That was pre-pandemic data. But a third of all adults were deficient. So, what impact does that have on female health particularly? So that's really important. There's many other minerals. I mean, I kind of mentioned calcium in association with vitamin D, and obviously iron as well. But iodine is also really important. That's in fish or seaweeds. We don't get much of it naturally in our foods in this country. In the UK, some areas of the world, there'll be more and more where people eat more fish, obviously. And it depends on whether there's iodized salt available in the country, but that's really important for pregnancy, but also for fetal development. And I think there's many other vitamins like B6 and B12. B6 has a role in kind of protein synthesis, so new tissues, that's really important. B12 has a role in myelin formation, so really important for new nervous system tissue. And things like zinc, again, that has a role in protein metabolism, but also, and obviously growth. So that would be important for pregnancy. Things like vitamin C, really important for skin and skin integrity and skin healing. And obviously in pregnancy, your skin stretches. So that's also, fundamental. So I think, we need a really healthy, balanced diet with all the macros. That's protein, carbs, fats, especially the good fats, in the right proportions. And we need all these micronutrients, which you only really get from a really well balanced diet with plenty of fruits and veg, whole grains, lots of colours, because you want the variety of colours in foods as well. Things like nuts and seeds, they're really mineral rich. So it's whole grains and mineral rich nuts and seeds. Beans, legumes, they're provided, they're intact, they haven't been interfered with generally, so they've got lots of those micronutrients in them. So that's what we'd be recommending and looking for to supply all those lovely nutrients.
Amazing, thank you. That was so informative, and I think that a lot of what you said is these vitamins and minerals that people have heard of and just either couldn't tell you really what they do, or just say, oh, well, it comes in every food, so we don't need to track it. And I think that is the mentality people have been brought up in. And at school, obviously, you're not teaching kids that you're going to be able to conceive in the next year or two, because it's not really what stage they think they're at. But obviously, it's so important to know why these vitamins are really important to you. So what we've done in the last 2 webinars as well, and kind of a lot of other female health practitioners speak about, is this idea of our menstrual cycle rather being our 5th vital sign. It gives you an insight into your health, which you've already kind of just spoken about, and I'm sure did loads on in terms of your nutritional kind of background. So with the the vitamin for the iron, the folic acid, the iodine, what sort of indications would someone, male or female, but maybe through their menstrual cycle, I guess, show that they are actually low in these things? Obviously, iron would be your blood is a lot thinner, so maybe you bleed a lot on your period and stuff. So what kind of things can people look out for to almost check and think, oh, okay, maybe I actually need to take more of this vitamin or mineral in?
I think if any woman is having really heavy periods, then there's going to be a need to replace the lost iron. So that is definitely one. And symptoms that you might need more iron include things like dizziness and fatigue. Being you might have, when you press your fingertips, obviously your fingernails, it should be kind of pinky. If you press it, it shouldn't stay white. You don't want it to be too white in there. And also, if you pull down the inner bit of your eye and your eyelids, if they're very pale in there, that would be maybe a sign as well. So I think obviously pallor can be a sign too. So those are the kind of things that you could look out for there. In terms of other things to do with periods, I think if anybody's got so sort of obviously having a period is one thing, but have you ovulating and have you ovulated is another, and not every period will come with ovulation. Some women can have an ovulatory cycles. So sort of for anybody who's kind of battling kind of ovulation issues, I think that, you know, they could be thinking about things like the vitamin D, because of its, you know, fundamental role in governing so many processes in the body. I think we might also then think about overall hormonal balance, and think like factoring in things, the nutrients that are needed for hormone synthesis. So the B6 and the zinc, often they're cofactors for hormonal synthesis or protein metabolism. So we'd be thinking about those things. I think one of the other things that can stand out with periods as well is if they're very painful and women get a lot of cramps, then magnesium can help that. And it could be worse if somebody wasn't getting enough, you know, magnesium. So there is some evidence around magnesium and period pain. So it being beneficial in terms of the therapy. But that's another nutrient actually that we know that teens and 20s, particularly females, don't get enough of from our National Nutrition and Diet Survey. So that's looking, you know, quite low. And I think sort of if somebody's got like irregular cycles, you know, period comes as a surprise, maybe not in a regular pattern, maybe not the standard 28 days or 32 days or whatever, but maybe it's coming once randomly, kind of once every 7 weeks when it wants to, then I think we might, you know, you'd have to think about overall energy intake, maybe kind of, you know, are they eating enough? You know, that's a key question there. You know, is there anything else kind of underpinning that? You know, what's the balance of the diet like? Are there any big gaps in any area? You know, is there enough fat? Fat is really important for steroid hormone synthesis. So, you know, we have traditionally demonized, you know, for the last 40 years, fat in the diet. But actually, fat is meant to make up a third of our calories. And what we want people to eat are more good fats. So the unprocessed nuts, seeds, their oils, olive oil, you know, avocado, oily fish. So not all fat is bad. And fat is very important for hormones and steroid hormones particularly. So yeah, we would think about those kind of things as well, I think. There's probably others, but that's what I can remember for now.
No, that's great. And I think where it comes back to again, especially predominantly obviously, yeah, teenage girls, early 20s and stuff, is not having enough fat on them. And actually what we've learned as well with obesity being an issue in younger children is that people are getting their periods a lot sooner, but also then it's the opposite. People aren't eating enough. Like you said, they are skipping periods. And obviously that's got then the knock-on effect of estrogen release and actually, you know, it's subject to kind of brittle bones and actually then the consequence of...
I mean, obviously low estrogen would affect bone health long-term, and eating disorder, you know, anorexia nervosa can be associated with, you know, quite severe bone and skeletal problems sort of later in life. If there's recovery from the anorexia, the impacts on bone might still be there. So yeah, it's really important, you know, for hormonal balance when you're young is really important for your future health.
So with kind of especially the list of vitamins and minerals you spoke about then, say people who are in their 20s who are maybe not ready to conceive yet, but that's in the next 10 years, maybe for their future. If they notice that they are actually quite low in some of these, is there a point, obviously everyone's different and you can't say for sure, but if they started to change their diet, how quickly could they notice that they start to restore back to, okay, I'm quite healthy, I could conceive quite naturally? Is there a time period?
I think what I would say is if anybody's struggling to, you know, with eating healthily and worried about their health, I think they should go to the doctors. And quite often the doctor might do things like a full, you know, look at your a blood count and look at your full blood count, and particularly to get sort of an assessment of iron status. If anybody thinks they're anemic, that's really important that is sort of picked up by your doctor and managed by your doctor, usually managed by your doctor. So I think, you know, that depends on how quickly you recover from that to some degree. It doesn't only depend on what you eat or what you take in orally, like maybe in supplementation. It also might depend on how well you absorb things. So we do see, obviously I'm interested in gluten and celiac disease, but in celiac disease, there are absorption issues that can affect the absorption of minerals, particularly calcium and iron. So if you are taking supplementation and levels don't come back to normal, then it might be a sign that your absorption, there's something that needs to be investigated in terms of absorption. So, that's, I think, an important point to bear in mind. But, and I think always, get help. And if you're an older person, maybe you're in your 30s and you're trying to conceive, then I think, if you can get an appointment with your doctor, assuming we're not in really madly busy COVID times, then, an appointment or a phone appointment where you discuss your plans, and maybe they do like a little check on you with your bloods, and they could look at even folic acid, B and B12, markers of B12 as well, which will give you some indication of that. They may be able to look at your bone markers. I think that would be useful if you're slightly older or if you've got some health issues. So I think sort of if you are just, if you're just maybe feeling a bit tired and you don't have any medical issues, and you can try to eat a bit more healthily, maybe take a multivitamin, then you should, people can start to feel more energized relatively quickly, sort of within a month or 6 weeks or something. And I think that I would say that clinically, from working with people in clinic, sometimes when people have had sort of really painful periods or really bad PMS, and they start to rebalance their diet and maybe do a bit more exercise and maybe take a multi, the periods can start really normalize within kind of 1 or 2 cycles. And that's very that's very pleasing for them and very motivating. And it can help them kind of, embrace the changes and maybe keep on going with it. So it can be, I think it can be quite quick. And if it isn't quick, then you need to ask why and get help. But do get help if you need it, and do talk to your doctor.
Yeah, I think that's something, especially doing more of this work, is a massive kind of advocate for most women actually is, going to the doctors kind of fully prepared, so you feel like, okay, this is what I need to ask, this is what I want to take from this, so you are ready for it. But it is kind of, I think a lot of people who are in your position in terms of doing a lot of research in this have noticed that there can be a lot of kind of gaslighting towards women in terms of period pains or kind of feeling tired, etc. And it can just be swept under the rug, which obviously prolongs. And if there is issues with conceiving, it can be prolonged. And yeah, you might be in a position where your older age then plays into a part as well as anything else.
Yeah, and I think, if you feel nervous about going to see a male doctor, just look for a female doctor. Sometimes also surgeries have like the nurse practitioners, and you could even book in with one of the nurse practitioners who might be female. So I think that there's options, and I would just encourage everyone to, not give up on exploring those options.
Great, that was answered pretty much. The next question, which was going to be, if someone is struggling to conceive, what advice would you give them to feel slightly less overwhelmed by it? But I think, unless you want to add anything more to that.
I think one of the things I would say is it's really important to be a normal, healthy weight. So that means we don't want somebody to be too thin. We don't want really body mass indexes under 18.5. So you're looking for a body mass index really between 18.5 and 24.9, which is normal, healthy weight. That's because weight influences hormones, essentially. So healthy weight, plenty of fluid, not too much caffeine, 1 or 2 cups a day is fine, but not loads. Not too much alcohol, alcohol in moderation, avoiding kind of binge drinking, particularly, I would say, not smoking. And I think that to know whether you're ovulating is key. So, perhaps exploring the use of either the ovulation predictor kits, if that's kind of lo-fi versions, There are more techie versions now. You can do apps. There's some with vaginal probes. Not that I would really advocate that. You can obviously learn to assess your vital signs, which is your cervical mucus, your body temperature, and do cycle mapping as well, charting, so you start to know how many days your cycle is. So I think that working out whether you ovulate is key, and then having plenty of sex if you want to conceive is also key. And most people don't have enough, actually, in terms of what is needed for conception. And it is recommended, every 2 or 3 days, as much as possible. It isn't just once or twice a month, because that isn't maximizing chances. So obviously it's about having sex at the right time. If you can try to do that close around the ovulation window, then you're increasing chances again. Alongside, I would say, just healthy, balanced diet and being positive. And I would say, if it doesn't happen, don't wait too long to seek help. And particularly if you're over 35, go to seek help sooner rather than later, because by the age of 35, women's fertility declines hugely. And by the age of 37, 90% of the eggs are gone. So if you're over 35, don't wait too long before getting help. Seek help, as a matter of priority. And try, to talk to your partner and to get support from your partner, but also to take your partner with you maybe to the appointment, and because they may need investigations too. So start that process at the same time. Basically, don't delay that.
No, I think that's a lot of really key points to take from there. And I think when it is compartmentalized and kind of think, okay, don't worry about this. And I think as well, stress, it's another element to it, but the having a lot of stress in your body and kind of that impact on you is just as detrimental to so many other things that you spoke about. So I suppose taking it step by step, and like you said, seeking help is kind of probably the most manageable way possible.
Impacts on hormones. So managing the stress, being positive, seeing your friends, talking about it, being open with people, not feeling ashamed of it, being open because it affects many people. I think all of that will lower the stress. So and that helps normalize your hormones. So I think, and many employers will have like employee wellbeing packages where there's access to counselling covered and people don't know. So if you're really struggling with something and your employer offers something like that, go for it, because just talking about it can improve outlook and positivity, and that can help everything settle physically as well.
Yeah, that's led on to actually a really kind of nice question. So one of the kind of things that we're speaking about in all of these webinars, I suppose, is why do you believe that this subject has such little coverage in school, and how do you believe schools or society should improve the conversation around conceiving, and I guess these myths and facts, and kind of just all of the information you provided today, kind of why isn't this a little bit more widely known?
I think the whole emphasis on, sex education previously has been about not getting pregnant. So it's all been about birth control and avoiding unplanned pregnancies or, teenage pregnancies. And I guess that they struggle then to deliver another message, and a message that says, actually, not everyone can get pregnant. So that it's the balance between those two things. And I think that is in part why it becomes a taboo when people have problems and can't conceive. It's because you've always been made to think it's easy. So you feel sort of slightly ashamed it isn't easy for you. So I think we do have to break this down, and they do need to wake up to it. And now it's 1 in 7 couples that needs help conceiving. It's it's an everyday occurrence for many people that even if they're not talking about it. So
yeah, I think it's the irony behind, I think, believing that if you say to a group of students who are learning about this for the first time, not everyone can get pregnant, then they're all going to go and have sex because they think they can't get pregnant. And you think, have a little bit more faith in kind of what they're learning and actually what they do with that information. But it's interesting.
I think it's about the timing of the messages, isn't it? Probably. So I think it needs to be interwoven to give a very, a balanced view, and to give people the skills that they might need to navigate successfully through their 20s and 30s, maybe when they're trying to conceive and can't. So.
Yeah, and I think we'll speak about it in another webinar, so we won't kind of go into it much, but it is this idea, especially when you're at school, I think encouraging, if your parents are in that relationship with them, but encouraging conversations with your parents that maybe your mum did have a miscarriage, and actually the shame attached to that, and it's, again, because it's just seen as almost a bigger period, it's dirty, it's wrong, it's too upsetting, whatever it is, and while it's very upsetting, having that conversation normalizes that it does happen to so many women, and these are the ways to cope with it if it does happen, maybe reduce the chances. We do have a question as well in the chat.
Inositol is really useful for polycystic ovarian syndrome. I mean, I think with polycystic ovarian syndrome, obviously, there's a kind of underlying metabolic issue with handling and processing and metabolism of carbohydrates. And women they generally have raised insulin levels, even if they're thin, because you can have PCOS and be thin. It's a syndrome, so there's a massive variety of symptoms with it. So some women are overweight, whereas other women can have polycystic ovaries but be thin, and they may be experiencing some of the other symptoms like acne or hirsutism or irregular, anovulatory cycles. So what we see in all women with PCOS is raised insulin levels, and it means that when they eat carbs, the insulin levels go really high, which is sort of a bit like it's like pre-diabetes in a way. Some women with PCOS may come from families where there's a history of diabetes, or may even have diabetes themselves. So this is diabetes type 2 I'm talking about there. So one of the key things is around managing carbohydrates in the diet, avoiding, refined carbohydrates and sugars. And inositol is really useful as a supplement. But there are other, fundamental supplements too, like vitamin D. So it's one to definitely put in the mix. And it has quite good results in terms of like symptom management. So it is one that we do recommend.
I was going to say, if anyone does have any more questions, either raise your hand or just pop it in the chat. But otherwise, we'll kind of close up unless there was anything kind of more you wanted to add. But I was going to, say if there's any kind of closing statement, any points that you think to take home a little bit more. If you wanted to add anything else.
No, I think it's great that you're talking about it. So I'm very pleased to be part of this, and to encourage people to talk about it. And I think sort of particularly for younger women, to not be shy, and to get help. One of the things I'd finish up with just saying is around endometriosis. There was an all-parliamentary report that was published in the UK last year that showed on average in the UK, women are waiting 8 years for a diagnosis, which is shameful, really. It's a very difficult condition to live with, very painful. It affects 10% of women. It's associated with a lot of pain through the cycle and pain through menstruation as well. And there can be quite serious complications in terms of surgeries and adhesions, as well as infertility. So one of the reasons to go to the doctors and to keep on going back, and if you don't get anywhere with one doctor, change and ask for an appointment with another, is to go back, because we need to get better at getting that diagnosed and picked up and appropriately managed. And they're trying to set up specialist centres, I think, in the UK for it to be better managed. But that's one of the reasons to not be shy. It's because we need to know that women who are having problems don't have that particularly. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's really a good point. And I'd love to actually do a webinar. I think at some point, so many people who have been involved in these webinars who can't make it in person and always want the recordings. A lot of them are people who have got endometriosis. And every single webinar we've done, obviously they all interlink, but that is the kind of prominent one in everyone. Obviously not normalizing menstrual pain, and then birth control, going on birth control to disguise pain that could be endometriosis, and then undiagnosed for 8 to 12 years. And then obviously conceiving and stuff as well. I think that, yeah, it's not something I struggle with, and I know so many people who do, and I you know, it's terrifying to think it takes that long to diagnose, and people kind of only see the pill as a way out. Yeah,
that happened to me personally. I had a long history of kind of pelvic pain through my cycle, particularly the latter half of my cycle and through menstruation. And I was told I was normal. I was told I had unexplained infertility, you know, because my hormones and blood tests were all normal. My scans were all normal. If you have an ultrasound, they can't see endometriosis. So it's only sort of quite at the last minute that I had a laparoscopy, and actually I had to pay for it privately because I was quite old by this time. And I was diagnosed with endometriosis when I was 41, after trying to have a baby for a long time. So it's one of those things that, you know, should have been picked up earlier, and I should have been treated, and then I would have had help with my conception difficulties, you know, much sooner. But I am really pleased to say I did have IVF, and I had twins very late in my 40s, but they have brought me such joy, and it was worth it. And, you know, I'm very lucky and blessed to have them. So I hope that gives some women some hope.
Yeah, I know. I think they are such important kind of stories to tell, and actually it's one thing reading all these data and saying that it can happen, etc. But when you actually hear about someone's personal experience, and then particularly if people have gone through endometriosis or IVF, etc., and actually listen to this and think, this is not normal to feel like this, but I'm not the only one who feels like this. So yeah, I mean, congratulations. Yeah, I'm quite a handful.
Yeah, nearly 9 now, and obviously it was a real challenge having a multiple pregnancy, and it was a high risk pregnancy as well, complicated, partly because I was 40, but also because it was multiple, you know, 2 babies. So yeah, I'm very blessed to have them. But they are boys, but I am trying to teach them about periods and these things, so that one day they will, you know, be I hope well-rounded human beings. So
I'm sure they will, with you as a mum. But thank you so much for putting some time aside today. It's been such an informative chat, and yeah, I've got a lot of people who want to have this webinar. I'll just unmute Jan. Oh, how do I do that? There you go.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I was on mute. I'm so bad with Zoom. I still can't seem to get used to it, even after 2 years of using it now.
Well, we can hear you fine.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I just wanted to speak to you a little bit more on the whole gluten association with PCOS, because I'm going through a really weird, it's really timely for this chat to have come up actually, but I've been gluten-free for 7 days now, just because I saw it somewhere that it might help with some things, and I feel quite different, and I do have PCOS, and my periods are very, very irregular, and they can be kind of like 60, 70 days apart, or they could be 40. I mean, they're just so unpredictable. But so coming off gluten for the past 7 days, I actually came on my period yesterday, and I just feel like there must be, I've looked into like a lot of stuff obviously online, because there must be some kind of association, but yeah, if you've just got any more info on that, really.
Well, I haven't actually looked at the association between PCOS and gluten, but there is an association. There is a higher risk. If you've got endometriosis, there's a higher risk of having celiac disease. But what I would say is that we know in women's health, you know, it's inextricably linked to gut health. And obviously we need a really healthy gut to absorb everything. We've kind of established that earlier. So one of the things, excuse me, one of the things that gluten is sticky. It's like the protein that it's made up of 2 proteins actually, but it's gliadin and glutenins, and they stick the kind of carbohydrate or the grain together. And obviously they're sticky when they go into our digestive tract. And on top of that, the gluten grains, they have a lot of other kind of anti-nutrients in them, which can be irritating to the gut. So the stickiness can kind of sometimes clog our we've got microvilli, they're kind of finger-like, well, we have villi and then microvilli that make a really thin absorptive surface in our gut lining. And when that gets clogged up or irritated or inflamed, it won't work so well. And this is why we see kind of sometimes, gastrointestinal kind of side effects with obviously celiac disease, but also gluten sensitivity. So I think that what used to be established is there was just celiac disease, which was an autoimmune condition where the gut lining gets damaged and the villi get raised in some cases. So you lose your absorptive surface. But what is now accepted is that there is gluten sensitivity, which is separate to celiac disease. And this is more likely to be through kind of irritation and inflammation. Generally, it might be more kind of irritation that's affecting the mucous membranes and our immune system at that level. So I think that when we avoid gluten, sometimes we give our system a break, especially if we don't have celiac disease. What we're doing is giving our system a break, and it can maybe feel better and heal. If we've got celiac disease, then what we do is we take away the thing that's making our immune system attack itself. So it's a kind of different mechanism. But what you might do as well is you might eat less carbohydrates, which would actually be better for PCOS. So if you take away gluten-containing foods, most of those are carbs. So
because I actually did a bit of keto kind of at the back end of last year, because I just read it was good for PCOS. So I did some intermittent fasting and some keto to help with insulin resistance. But I didn't actually feel that great on keto. And I think it's because my carbs were so limited. And I kind of, just before Christmas, I stopped that. But I did have another period just before Christmas. And I was thinking, so I'm not sure the date. It was in December, the last one. And so obviously I'm now on my January one. But it was just very strange that I'd cut out obviously the carbs, and then I obviously got another period.
Well, I think sort of some of the mechanism why a gluten-free diet can help people is it can be, depending on what people eat, and it can be a lower carbohydrate diet. So I think that what my advice to you would be to maybe stick with it, to try and stick with it for 3 months, to chart your cycle, and to try and go low carb gluten-free because of PCOS. So that means not having lots of gluten-free breads or pastries or biscuits, because we know that they're higher in fat and bad fat and sugar and salt sometimes than normal counterparts. So we want to have whole grain kind of gluten-free options or more paleo type meals. But I would have unlimited kind of veg and fruit, because that's healthy carbs. And I would go for lower sugar fruits, things like berries, probably lots of, if you can, even, berries, and, avoiding the very sugary fruits and fruit juices particularly. So I think, think about that and chart your cycle. And then what you could do after 3 months is if you feel transformed, if you have, I don't know whether you need to lose weight or whether you don't, but if you have lost weight and you need to, then that would be positive. So you could just monitor your weight as well and your symptoms and see whether you want to continue it. If you don't want to continue it, you could try to introduce gluten again, maybe for a week, but monitor symptoms and see how that impacts on your cycle, and then make a decision after you've tried it. If you bring it back in, my advice would be to try things like sourdough bread, because the cultures that they make with sourdough, they tend to break down some of the carbs, but also break down the gluten so it can be better tolerated by the body. But I would say, you know, one slice of sourdough with some scrambled eggs, say, or something like that.
Yeah.
Or if you're going to go carbs, you know, and you're doing sort of lentils and rice or beans and rice, something like that, I'd maybe try for a brown basmati rice or a basmati rice rather than a fat grain rice, because that's got more carb in it. So I'd keep going low carb, but also kind of higher protein, higher good fat, maybe paleo informed kind of eating. Does that make sense?
It does. It's just a bit of a struggle with obviously on an Indian diet, a lot of it is rice and chapatis, and it's just quite hard, like, because I eat a lot of Indian food, so cutting out gluten's been really hard just with the chapatis alone.
I think I would say what you may be able to do is still have rice, but have less, like, so think portion control and try and have more of the pulses. So that would be my advice, or to pad it out with more green veggies. And I think the patties, I would say, I don't know whether you could experiment with, in fact, we had a student at Worcester called Geeta Salan, and she made a whole range of gluten-free. I can't remember the name of her food, which is terrible, but I'm going to have to, try and email her and I'll send it to Beth. But she makes a whole range of gluten-free Indian foods.
Oh, wow.
And she was selling them. She's called Geeta Salhan. She's got a food brand because she has celiac disease. So I wonder whether her products may be able to help you.
That would be really good, because just finding food to eat at the moment is really difficult. So
I mean, I make sourdough bread, and you might be able to try and make a gluten-free alternative, maybe. It's but I think I'd look at her products. So I might I'll see if I can find, she's a friend on Facebook, so I'll see if I can get some details from her, and I'll send them to Beth.
That would be really good. Thank you.
Yeah, any of this information, what I'll do is on our socials and stuff. And Jazz, if you put your email in the chat, then any kind of stuff that Justine sent me or whatever, or the information I can send on to you. But I know that you've got to go because you've got your kids to finish school soon. But again, I'll send emails and stuff. So if there's any more questions you wanted to ask, then we'll make sure they're covered. But thank you so much for this. It's been really informative. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I don't mind if you want to post the PowerPoint. I mean, you check it, but if you want to post it anywhere, that's fine as well. If you want to use it. Okay.
Yeah, no, definitely. We will do. Thanks, Jazz. All right. Have a fun time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.